Think of a scene from any movie in which the protagonist is running away from pursuit, but in the last seconds, when he is already safe, the villain's foot stops the closing door and the protagonist turns into a vulnerable victim. A young woman's morning began like this scene. She found herself trapped. We all know that in a state, law must always prevail. Not religion, not tradition, but the defense of human rights and freedom. However, some attitudes formed many years ago and stereotypes from childhood, imposed by society, affect the woman, and under the influence of unspoken rules, she continues to live with a tyrant and tolerates violence. Today, our reality is such that even in the modern world, these attitudes are still relevant and continue to change people's lives. Today, we will move to Central Asia, namely to Kyrgyzstan, and look at the customs and lives of people of the state with the oldest history. Kyrgyzstan is a country rich in natural beauty. After all, 3/4 of the country are mountains. Almost all of its territory is located within 2 mountain systems. The overwhelming majority of believers in Kyrgyzstan are Muslims. There are Christians, Orthodox, Catholics, and various Protestant movements. At the same time, Kyrgyzstan is a secular state. It is a state with a system where religion is separated from state power and which is regulated on the basis of civil rather than religious norms. The country's authorities punish members of the clergy for performing religious rituals that contradict the laws of the republic. But in the case of one fragile young woman who begged for help from the state and asked for protection, the authorities showed complete indifference. Asel Nogoibaeva was born in 1986 in the city of Tokmak, Chue Oblast, Kyrgyzstan. After finishing school, the girl finished hairdressing courses and moved to Bishkek to find a job in a salon. It is easy to get lost in a large city, but sometimes it is much easier to meet people there. One day, Azamat Estebesov came to the hairdresser's shop where Asel worked to get a new haircut. He liked the pretty, slender girl very much, and he invited her for a cup of fragrant coffee. The meeting became fateful for both of them. After all, Azamat also liked Asel very much. He seemed to be a simple, attentive man who was brought up in a prosperous family and was very hard-working. Asel's family approved of her daughter's choice because Azamat was very religious and honored Muslim traditions. Asel's parents did not see the disadvantages of the groom and with a calm heart blessed the marriage. At the age of 19, Asel married her beloved Azamat. Soon the firstborn child was born in the young family. A boy. It would seem that every man dreams of an heir, of someone who will continue the family. But in our story, the joy of fatherhood, as if a genie from a jug, caused the lowly and cruel demons of Azamat. So, on an ordinary evening, a simple family story turned into a real drama, which provoked a whole series of sad events. Asel and Azamat were bathing their son. The inexperienced father accidentally poured too much water on the child. He shook with fright and cried a lot. Asel reacted rudely and shouted at her husband. Azamat did not hesitate to hit her in the face in response. That same evening, Asel and the child went to her mother's house. Azamat repented and asked for forgiveness. He begged and said that this would never happen again. It is worth noting that the Kyrgyz mentality is very different from other mentalities. From childhood, girls are taught patience. A husband should be alone for the rest of his life because divorce is not welcomed, although it is not forbidden, and the Muslim religion plays an important role in creating and preserving a family by any means. Knowing the traditions and customs of the Turkic family, Asel, who herself grew up without a father, did not want her son to repeat her fate. The girl believed that Azamat raised his hand for the first and last time, and they would be able to continue living happily. Asel came back, but she was mistaken. A year later, the family returned from Bishkek to her native Tokmak to live near her parents. The return was joyful because Asel was expecting her second child. Asel was walking with her son on the playground near her home and met several classmates. They said hello and had a nice conversation. However, returning home from the walk, Asel again received a strong blow to the face. The blow was so strong that she fell and slipped on the linoleum. Unfortunately, this blow and fall triggered a miscarriage. After moving to Tokmak, Azamat became Asel's shadow. He stealthily followed her on the street. He was constantly looking for a reason for new conflicts. The man got a taste for it and could no longer refrain from beating her. Only his outer shell remained of the kind and attentive Azamat, although Asel had changed, because his gaze was filled with anger and hatred. Asel has resigned herself to living under total control for the sake of her children. After all, she had another son again. The beatings did not stop for years. Asel's mother, knowing about her daughter's family drama, could not stand it and took her to her home. But the man did not stop. He came again and again for his family and begged for forgiveness, promising that this would not happen again. Tradition intervened again because in Kyrgyzstan, a son must grow up with his father. Such are the rules. Asel ended up going back 5 times. Life became a nightmare for Asel and she was tired of enduring it. After each day of painful beatings, she went to the police in the hope of getting help. But there is no criminal sentence for domestic violence in Kyrgyzstan. The maximum that was applied to Azamat was 3 days in the isolation center. Then he came back again, and this nightmare continued over and over again for 6 years. Azamat did not even want to hear about divorce. He threatened that if his wife filed for divorce, he would find her, the children and her family, and kill them all. During the period of the worst beatings, Asel's family took her to Italy. In Italy, Asel had big plans. She settled in with her brother, who helped her find a job. She worked 3 jobs, a nurse, a cleaner, and she walked dogs. The woman worked without weekends to save money for an apartment, to become financially independent, and to leave her tyrant husband. After 3.5 years, she had already saved enough money to buy an apartment and open a mini business. During the years in Italy, Asel saw a lot of new things. She communicated with interesting people, and gradually her moral state recovered. But her maternal heart ached for her children. After all, she had to leave them for long 3 years, for the sake that they had a bright future ahead of them. The woman knew that the father never beat the children and did not show aggression towards them, so she was calm about it. But when she returned from Italy, a bleak picture awaited her. The children were living in terrible conditions. In one small room they slept, ate, played, and even went to the bathroom. The children did not go to school or for walks. They didn't eat well. And again, tradition. Azamat raised real Turkic men and created truly harsh conditions for their existence. Instead of school, they attended a madrasa, a Muslim religious and educational institution where they learn religion and how to read the Quran. Asel took the children. Azamat did not mind. It would seem that she was saved from the cruel captivity, but Azamat began to pursue his Asel again. He called and offered to meet her. Asel was categorical and made it clear that in case of harassment she would file a police report. But this did not stop him. In the evening, Asel went to the store to get some dishwashing detergent. The store was very close by. On her way, she met Azamat, who was following her again. He grabbed her and threatened her with a knife and took her to a dark, remote place. There, right on the street, he brutally beat Asel and took advantage of her. The strange sounds were noticed by passers-by who called the police. On September 1st, 2022, Asel wrote a statement to the police on her ex-husband about rape. He was detained and a criminal case was opened. Asel's family was sure that he would go to trial and the torment for all of them would end. But no. Azamat's family became active and could not accept that their son was a tyrant. Azamat's mother and sisters repeatedly begged Asel to withdraw the application. Another strange tradition. A woman in Kyrgyzstan cannot report her husband because it is a great shame. To beat, humiliate, and rape a woman is not shameful. Azamat's relatives discouraged Asel as much as they could. By deception, they succeeded. Asel took back the application in exchange for Azamat's application for relinquishment of parental rights. But he is still officially their father. The Sokoluk District Court dismissed the case because of the victim's counter-application and reconciliation of the parties. After being released, Azamat started a new wave of harassment and threats. He wrote daily threatening messages to Asel, changed phone numbers to relentlessly continue his pressure. He openly said in voice messages that if he caught Asel, he would kill her. He waited for her in the driveway. He waited for her at work. He followed her everywhere. For 3 months, Asel's relatives took turns living with her and her children, protecting her from Azamat's attacks. But this did not save the woman from the second violence. On January 31st, 2023, the woman went to the police again and reported that her ex-husband had again taken advantage of her by using force. A criminal case was also opened and the suspect was detained. After the investigation, the materials were sent to the court. The family was waiting for the decision and expected a real term of at least 5 years. On the day when the trial was to take place, the judge and 2 prosecutors invited Asel to a separate office. Azamat was there. In front of her eyes, they took off his handcuffs, informing him that they applied 3 years of probation instead of 5 years of imprisonment. In fact, he remained free. The court considered such a decision appropriate because Azamat has an elderly mother with a disability and 2 children from his marriage to the victim. Let me clarify that probation is a set of measures applied to convicted persons. The purpose of probation is to correct behavior and prevent the commission of new crimes. Asel was crying. She felt herself driven into the darkest corner from which there was no escape. Despair and fear once again confidently settled in the woman's life. But Asel did not wait for new attacks. She no longer believed anyone and did not listen to Azamat's relatives. Asel took down all the beatings. She hired a lawyer and filed an appeal with the h.a.c.k.e.d Regional Court. The lawyers provided the court with all the threats in the messages, all the voice messages, and this time, the case went to court. But a series of different events constantly postponed the hearing, bringing closer the worst day of Asel. First, the lawyer fell ill and the trial was postponed for a month. The second and third hearings were also postponed for inexplicable reasons. At the 4th hearing, Asel begged not to postpone the hearing any longer because she was afraid not of beatings, but of death. Azamat continued to walk around freely and make attempts on Asel's life. On the eve of the meeting, he sent her a photo of a black backpack with a knife and a rope, with the caption, "I am ready to meet you," at the bottom. But due to Azamat's refusal of the state lawyer and the involvement of a private lawyer in the case was again postponed indefinitely. With such indifference of justice and law enforcement agencies, Asel simply had no chance to save herself. September 20th, 2023 began as usual. At 6:30 a.m., Asel woke up her children. They had breakfast together, and the caring mother accompanied her eldest son to school, wishing him a good day. Asel was about to leave the house too, so she didn't close the door, finishing getting ready. She brushed her hair as the front door suddenly opened. Azamat came in very quickly and very aggressively. The woman did not have time to react and close herself in the bathroom. He immediately hit her twice on the head, after which Asel fell into a stupor of incomprehension about what was happening. After the blows on her head, the pervert grabbed her by the throat and started strangling her. Asel lost consciousness. Nothing further. Asel lay unconscious. Sometimes she heard Azamat's voice, and it seemed to her that everything that was happening was a terrible dream. But the strong crying of her son brought her back to reality. Asel realized that she was awake. The boy covered himself with a blanket and crying repeated, "Daddy, don't do it." But his father ordered to keep silent, otherwise he would slaughter him too. Asel did not remember how from the bathroom, where she tried to hide, she found herself in the kitchen. He threw the unfortunate woman to the floor like an unnecessary thing, then picked her up again and continued to abuse her. In a moment, the pervert had lifted Asel up again and leaned her against the wall and was stabbing her face and neck with a clerical knife in cold blood. The next time Asel regained consciousness, she looked around and saw that everything was covered in blood, but she didn't realize what was happening. She had lost a lot of blood and her throat was dry. She kept asking for a drink. Her once beloved husband brought her a bucket of rags, and in it was water mixed with blood. The giver had gotten so into the taste of blood that he started picking out a knife. He went through all the kitchen knives and tried them on, choosing the one that would reach Asel's heart. But suddenly the door opened, and police officers entered the house. It turned out that a neighbor from downstairs heard the screams, and knowing about the difficult situation of Asel and her ex-husband, called the police, which saved her life by stopping the horrible torture. Azamat Estebesov resisted and attacked the officers with a knife. In such turmoil, no one realized what had happened. The whole apartment was drenched in blood. Azamat started cutting Asel in the bathroom, then dragged her to the kitchen through the hallway. He cut off his ex-wife's nose and ears and inflicted multiple wounds on her face and neck. He cut her throat, slashed her face, and beat her very badly. The district police officers arrived and called an ambulance. After assessing Asel's appearance, they began to look for the cut organs in a hurry, but they were nowhere to be found. Would you be surprised to know where they found the woman's ears and nose? In the monster's pocket. In pursuit of lost time, the police officers took Asel by their car to the 4th City Hospital in Bishkek. But there they did not provide her with first aid, explaining that according to her propiska, she did not belong to their hospital. Not only the doctors did not provide the victim with first aid, but they did not even stop the bleeding. Only in the second hospital, she received first aid and stopped bleeding. She was then sent to the National Hospital, where she was operated on for 9 hours. 6 doctors worked meticulously to restore Asel's face. The found amputated organs were carefully delivered by the district police officers. The doctors meticulously collected everything, as the earlobes and nerve nodes were completely severed. Azamat did it with a special knife. It was very delicate work. The nose was also completely cut off. In the hospital, Asel did not regain consciousness for a long time. She miraculously survived. Psychologists warned that recovery would be long, and it would be very dangerous. The young, beautiful woman was disfigured. A criminal case under the article, causing grave harm to health of the Criminal Code of the Kyrgyz Republic, was initiated on the fact of the attack. The police detained the suspect in the commission of the crime. He was sent to a pre-trial detention center. On September 27, 2023, the sentence against Azamat Estebesov was changed to 8 years of imprisonment. By presidential decree, 9 judges were dismissed from their posts. Among them is the judge of Sokolok District Court of Choi Region Kielbek Toktomamatov, who released the man under probation supervision. The decree of the head of state says that Toktomamatov was dismissed in connection with the violation of the requirements of impeccable behavior of a judge. In addition to him, Sadir Japarov, by decree of November 1st, at the suggestion of the Council of Judges, prematurely terminated the powers of a number of judges who in one way or another violated the requirements of impeccability. 6 investigators were involved in further investigation of the incident. They brought up all the previous cases of Azamat Estebesov and studied them again. They took into account all the facts they found, and on them in the new indictment case, there were already 11 articles. At the end of December 2023, all investigative activities were completed, and on January 9, 2024, the first court hearings began. Azamat Estebesov did not admit guilt on any of the 11 episodes charged against him. He avoided answering the judge's questions in every possible way, and in some cases stated that he was possessed by a demon, so he could not speak. He behaved aggressively towards the witnesses, because of which the trial was postponed. On January 26, 2024, the final closed court session was held. Judge Taalaykul Padirkulova, taking into account all the details of such a complex case, sentenced Azamat Estebesov to 20 years of imprisonment without the right to apply probation. He must also pay 2 million sums to his ex-wife and a fine of 80,000 sums to the state. The judge decided to count 1 day spent in pre-trial detention center for 2. In spring, the defendant filed an appeal, but the sentence of 20 years imprisonment remained unchanged. Asel Nogoibaeva noted that she would go further and demand that the former spouse be sentenced to life imprisonment, and all those involved in encouraging his actions be publicly removed from office and punished. Let this be an example to everyone. I want no woman in Kyrgyzstan to endure the pain that I and my family are carrying. Thank you all who do not stand by, the victim concluded. Asel Nogoibaeva's family and activists asked that her ex-husband be given a life sentence. After all, despite the imprisonment, Azamat continued to text threats to Asel with a warning that he would still go out and find her. The case of Asel Nogoibaeva, about the powerlessness of a woman before the law of the country, and how a once loved and loving person turns into a cold-blooded monster in an instant, has finally come to its conclusion under the law. This case caused a wide public resonance throughout Kyrgyzstan. Asel's sister, Diana Yelkin, appealed to MPs to pass a law on domestic violence. She said that if the MPs do not pass a law on domestic violence, she will make them look at Asel's face without bandages and think what one wrong decision is worth. Asel's sister published a petition asking for a life sentence without parole for her sister's ex-husband. She recalled that her sister divorced her husband 5 years ago because of beatings and inadequate behavior of her spouse, but he did not leave her alone even after the divorce, stalking, beating, and abusing her. Azamat Estebesov is a dangerous person for society. People like him should not live free. They are obsessive and manic people. People like him should be behind bars. We ask for a life sentence for this monster. He has already killed a seal morally. He mutilated her face in front of her young son. People like him should be sentenced for life without the right to parole. She appeals in the petition. It doesn't matter what country it happened in. Family violence often takes monstrous forms. The topic of domestic violence should unite all women of the world. And we should not forget that religion is not an indicator that a person is adequate. Now Asel has a new life. Her new identity brings her great suffering. Despite the fact that Asel's wounds are gradually healing, full recovery of hearing and breathing functions will be long. In her interview, Asel told how she saw her face for the first time after the tragedy. There were no mirrors in my room, since I was not allowed to look at myself. It was a day off. My doctors were not there along with the doctor on duty, so I went to the first floor for dressing. I had my bandages removed, and there was a metal operating lamp. The doctor on duty had not put it away. I saw myself in the reflection. I'm afraid of myself. I can't look at myself in the mirror. I could already see my ears. From the shock, I lost consciousness. 2 weeks later, Asel saw her face completely. Her brother gave her a dressing at home. All the mirrors in the house were removed in advance, except for one mirror in the bathroom, because it could not be removed. When her brother left for 3 seconds, Asel quickly stood up and decided to look at herself. After seeing her reflection, she fainted. She had a very strong hysteria. Asel said that no one should ever see such ugliness. But the restoration of Asel's face is still ahead of her. Before the plastic surgery, she will have several operations to reconstruct her face, restore the frame of her ears and nose. These are surgeries that require long preparation, skin augmentation, and a long recovery period of at least a year. Also, Asel has lost her hearing by 20%, which will definitely be corrected as well. The difficulty is that these operations are not performed in Kyrgyzstan. Such complex operations are carried out in Turkey or in other countries, and this requires very large funds. Mikhail Surer, a plastic surgeon from Turkey, offered to perform the surgery free of charge, that is to cover all the costs. At first, Kyrgyz doctors told him that Asel had only the tip of her nose, but when Surer saw the woman's face without bandages, he was extremely shocked. It turned out that plastic surgery alone would not do the trick in this case. First, a whole series of operations to restore organs was needed. The surgery to restore the ears and nose of Asel Nogoibaeva, who was mutilated by her ex-husband, will cost at least $45,000. Asel's sister, Diana Yelkin, who is actively engaged in disseminating information and raising funds for the operation, noted that all complex operations will be carried out in Turkey. Unfortunately, we have not raised even half of the needed $45,000. In addition, there are other expenses for accommodation, psychologist, rehabilitation, interpreter, medicines, and so on, Diana Yelkin said. I have more pictures of her without bandages. They are very scary. They are not for the faint of heart. I have been unable to come to my senses since yesterday, and I can't accept this face because there is nothing left of her ears and nose. Thank you to the doctors. They did everything they could. The main thing is that sepsis and gangrene did not go, said the sister of the victim. Diana Yelkin notes that if they cannot raise the necessary amount of money in the near future, she will publish her sister's face without bandages. Let the whole world see the true face of lawlessness, the true face of a victim of violence. Let every judge, policeman, deputy hang a picture of the mutilated Asel and look at her photo before making the necessary decisions, laws. If a year ago the judge had not given probation to this monster, all this would not have happened. The family and Asel were hoping for the law, for independent judges. Now we are making a challenge to everyone. a challenge to the judiciary of Kyrgyzstan. Diana regularly organized events to draw the attention of the Kyrgyz public to the problem of domestic violence against women. So far, fundraising has been held to help restore Asel Nogoibaeva's health. Asel's support, despite the terrible ordeal she endured, is an example of courage and determination in the fight against violence. Asel, who herself has yet to recover mentally and physically from 12 years of beatings, dreams of opening a foundation to help women who have also been abused like herself. After being abused, you can't stop helping others. To conclude the story, the real ugliness that no one should see is not Asel's face at all, but the essence of her ex-husband. Even with fatigue and pain in her eyes, one can see that Asel is a very feminine, gentle, and beautiful woman. It does not matter how her face looks now. She is a beautiful woman, because her soul and heart are beautiful. I would like to appeal to all women: never tolerate and do not expect your chosen one to change, run away, and never come back. All nations have tyrants. A nighttime stroll turns into a tragic crime. Going anywhere with someone you barely know is generally a bad idea that often ends poorly, especially when you're in a foreign city and the acquaintance was made just a couple of hours ago at a local entertainment venue. It's not necessarily, though not excluded, that the casual friend will turn out to be a maniac, assailant, or robber, but they might accidentally or intentionally draw you into troubles, or even lead to a disaster. An American student named Marisela Botella Valadez planned to simply have a good time at a popular nightclub, where she unexpectedly met an aspiring rapper who showed interest in her and suggested they continue the evening in a more intimate setting. However, the new acquaintance was already in a relationship, and a complicated one at that. He was part of a rather unusual love triangle, and the other participants did not appreciate the sudden appearance of the young beauty. Her naive trust cost the young woman her life, but the case turned out to be anything but straightforward. It involved insane jealousy, the desire to cling to fading youth, occult practices, and even an international search for fugitive criminals. Nevertheless, thanks to the Herculean efforts of the investigators, it was possible to find all participants of the crime and establish the role of each. What is known about Marisela? Marisela Botella Valadez was born in 1997 in Seattle, the largest city in the state of Washington. She was the eldest of 2 children in a family of Latin American descent, raised alongside her younger brother. People described her as a sweet, sociable young woman who always had many friends, performed well in school, and after graduating, became a student at a prestigious university. Furthermore, Marisela was considered truly beautiful, petite, slim brunette with big brown eyes, luxurious hair, and a flawless figure. She always had a host of admirers, loved being the center of attention, enjoyed lively parties where she could have fun, and cherished every day. On Saturday, October 3rd, 2020, the student flew to Dallas to meet up with old friends. However, by Monday morning, she planned to return. Her brother was supposed to meet her at the airport on October 5th, after which they would head to the university together, but the plane arrived without her. The search for the missing student. When all the passengers from the flight arriving from Dallas had left the airport, her brother realized that Marisela was not among them. Concerned, the young man tried to call his sister, but her phone was turned off. He then called their parents to inform them about the situation. Since Marisela was a serious and responsible young woman, it was out of character for her to disappear without warning and not show up for university classes. The family started calling her friends in Dallas, trying to find out where she might have gone and where she was last seen. It turned out that the night before, she had been partying at one of the city's most popular clubs, where she met a black man named Chuck. The pair danced, enjoyed themselves, and had alcoholic drinks, after which they disappeared together. Marisela was not seen again, and her phone went unanswered. The information seriously alarmed and frightened her parents, so they immediately decided to report her disappearance to the police. It turned out that the young woman had indeed bought tickets for a flight to Seattle, but for some reason she had not boarded the plane. No one had seen her since that night, and no one knew where she might be. It was necessary to find out who Maricella's new acquaintance was, where they had gone, and whether she had gone with him willingly. Examining footage from external surveillance cameras located around the club, law enforcement officers saw the missing student leaving with a young man whose face could not be clearly seen on the video. According to the footage, she appeared to be walking with him voluntarily. The pair got into a black Audi car and drove off in an unknown direction. The mysterious new friend. One of her missing friends mentioned that her companion was possibly named Chuck, but that information was insufficient. Soon, thanks to the street camera footage, it was possible to determine the direction the car had traveled. Additionally, it turned out that the pair had stopped at a supermarket, where they also appeared on camera footage. Both looked happy, smiling, and showing affection for each other. The young woman picked out several drinks and candies, and the young man paid for everything at the checkout using a card in the name of Charles Beltran. Thus, it became clear who Maricela had left with. Beltran was a 31-year-old musician and even considered a rising local rap star. However, the man had a criminal past, having been incarcerated twice for robbery and armed assault. He had served less than 3 years and was released on parole. Recently, the young man's career was on the rise, and he was even preparing to release his own music album. It was soon discovered where Charles lived, and by checking the cell phone carrier's data, it was revealed that the missing student's phone had been active at that fatal night's location. However, the house was owned by a woman named Lisa Dykes, and the musician was just renting a room from her. The very strange house. When police accompanied by an FBI agent assigned to investigate the girl's disappearance visited the address, the house was empty. They were only able to contact Lisa Dykes by phone as she claimed to be out of state on business. She confirmed that Charles Beltran had been renting a room in her home, but claimed that he moved out a couple of weeks ago, and she had no knowledge of his whereabouts since. Since law enforcement was unable to locate or contact the sole suspect, they obtained a warrant to search the house where he had lived. What awaited them inside was a collection of unexpected and frightening discoveries. The house was in chaos, with disorder and unsanitary conditions prevalent. It seemed as if the occupants had left in a hurry, taking only the most necessary items and leaving everything else scattered around. The kitchen sink was piled high with dirty dishes, moldy food remnants sat on the table, and trash littered the corners. Notably, amidst all this mess, numerous empty bottles of cleaning and detergent products were found scattered around, with traces on the floors and carpets, as if something had been thoroughly scrubbed. In one of the upstairs rooms, a peculiar and even sinister black statue of death, draped in a black cloak and holding a scythe, stood. It could have been mistaken for a quirky piece of decor, but it was set up as a sort of altar with wax candles, dried flowers, and 2 metal bowls. It resembled the Mexican religious cult of Santa Muerte, translated as Holy Death, where a female deity representing death is worshipped. The house and the atmosphere within seemed more than just strange. It felt as if something terrible had happened here, and afterward the occupants hurriedly cleaned up, packed the essentials, and simply fled. To ascertain this, a more thorough examination was conducted using special tools to detect traces of blood. This revealed numerous wiped bloodstains on the floor in one of the bedrooms, in the bathroom, and in the hallway. It was later discovered that the bedroom, where the carpet was practically soaked in blood, belonged to Charles, and it appeared that a violent crime had taken place there. But who was the victim? The missing girl, the tenant himself, or someone else? Despite all attempts to clean the traces, the blood had soaked into the covering, seeped under the baseboards, stained the wallpaper and furniture. Experts compared the found traces with Maricela's DNA, and any last doubts were dispelled. The blood belonged to the girl. The house was sealed as a crime scene, but now the task was to find the main suspect, possible accomplices, and witnesses. This task was not easy. As it turned out, Charles had fled, and the owner, even before the police visit, had hastily put the house up for sale. Therefore, the police decided to learn as much as possible about everyone who had recently lived in this house. The love triangle. Neighbors revealed that 3 people lived in the house: 57-year-old Lisa Dyke, 48-year-old Nina Morano, and 31-year-old Charles Beltran. However, the nature of their relationship and their sudden disappearance remained unclear. It was necessary to investigate each individual's background and find and interrogate them as soon as possible. The house owner, who was the only one reachable by phone, had worked many years as a lawyer, known as a commanding, ambitious, and quite contentious woman. She had been married 3 times, and after becoming a widow several years ago, received a substantial inheritance. There was no financial necessity for her to rent a room to some guy, nor was Lisa known for her charity, suggesting she had some other interest in the matter. The young black man named Charles, or simply Chuck, Beltran, dreamed of making it on the music scene to build a rap career, but he lacked both money and connections, and his criminal past hindered him. However, about a year ago, he met Dyke, who moved him into her house, helped set up a small recording studio there, and even sponsored the filming of several music videos for the aspiring rapper. Moreover, she even bought him a car, paid for his entertainment, and fashionable clothes, while insisting that their relationship was strictly business, and she saw great potential in this talented young man. The money she spent on him was an investment. The situation with Nina Morano was even more intriguing. She and Lisa had been in an intimate relationship for a long time, and after Dyke became a widow, she stopped hiding her affair with her lover. Moreover, several months ago, the women officially legalized their union by getting married. Nina moved into her spouse's house, where Charles was already living. According to a close friend of hers, Lisa had an intimate relationship with the young musician. Although she vehemently denied this, she secretly told her friend how amazing a lover he was. Apparently, she was in love with him because after their relationship began, Dyke desperately tried to look younger. She lost 55 pounds, changed her image, started wearing bright makeup, and even got several colorful tattoos. Most importantly, she evicted her own children from the home, who in her view were already grown enough and interfered with her personal life. Clearly, Chuck also had a vested interest in living with a wealthy, albeit older lover, as she solved all his financial problems and helped him build a music career. However, he was a noticeable, attractive man in good physical shape, so women did not ignore him. He often engaged in fleeting flings with young women, which drove Lisa insane with jealousy. But what role did Nina Morano play in this whole story, and specifically in the case of Maricella's disappearance? According to the same close friend, Lisa's spouse was part of this strange love triangle and was the only woman with whom Dyke not only allowed her young lover to sleep, but even insisted on it. Nina was also a successful lawyer and a very affluent woman. Thus, this trio lived in pleasure, sparing nothing. Interestingly, after their wedding, both women took the boy's last name, so the house was occupied by Charles, Lisa, and Nina Beltran. Where did the house's inhabitants vanish to? It was discovered that since the student's disappearance, no one had been seen at the house where her blood was found. Lisa was only contacted once. She answered a few questions, stated she was in another state, and thereafter her phone went unanswered. Nothing was known about the fate and whereabouts of Nina, as well as the main suspect, Charles. By tracking mobile phone signals, it was determined that on the night of October 5th, all 3 inhabitants, as well as the missing Maricela, were in the house. By early morning, their device signals had moved to a suburban area of Dallas, in a fairly deserted, wooded area. Then the signals disappeared, and a few days later, Lisa only responded from her second work phone, which later also became unreachable. The mutilated remains. Using geolocation data from the mobile devices, the route taken that night by the sought-after group was traced, and the stops they made were identified. It was presumed that somewhere in this area, they might have disposed of the missing student's body. This defined a broad search radius, but the area was vast and difficult to navigate, so progress was slow despite efforts. Closer to the new year, The search operation was halted as neither the body nor any clues were found. However, in March 2021, a local hunter wandering through the woods stumbled upon a human skull that appeared relatively fresh. He promptly reported his find to the police, and the remains were soon brought to a forensic laboratory for necessary examinations. Dental records confirmed that the body belonged to the Seattle student who had been missing for nearly half a year. However, the advanced state of decomposition and damage caused by wild animals made it impossible to establish the exact cause of death. Notably, several characteristic marks on the bones suggested knife wounds, but it was unclear whether these were the fatal injuries. The arrest of the first suspects. Soon after the grim discovery in the forest, authorities managed to track down Lisa, who had moved to Florida with Nina and rented a house in Miami by the ocean. Unfortunately, only Nina could be apprehended, while her spouse, learning about the situation, hurriedly went into hiding. There were no traces of Charles, although he periodically communicated with former girlfriends via messengers. In her last correspondence, Dykes mentioned that the young woman's body had been found and warned everyone to be extremely cautious as the police were on their trail. Nina, now incarcerated, refused to provide any information, claiming she knew nothing about Maricella's fate. Meanwhile, Lisa, using all her connections, attempted to hire a good lawyer for her spouse. It also emerged that while in Florida, Nina had put her house in South Carolina up for sale, trying to liquidate it as quickly as possible. It was likely that the women needed the money to continue hiding or to leave the country altogether. A month later, authorities successfully located and arrested Lisa, after which both women were transported back to Dallas. Initial interrogations yielded no results, and a bail of $500,000 was set for each suspect. They managed to post the significant amount and were released under house arrest. However, the women were fitted with tracking bracelets, which allowed their whereabouts to be monitored. A bold escape attempt. In August of the same year, police traced Charles to Utah, hiding at the house of one of his ex-girlfriends. The woman, who was raising a 5-year-old son fathered by Beltram, was so pleased that the child's father had returned to her that she didn't question the reasons for his unexpected decision. The arrested man initially refused to testify or cooperate with the police. He still hoped that his wealthy lover, using her money and connections, would hire a good lawyer for him and help him avoid prison, but soon the situation drastically changed. On Christmas Eve of December 2021, the tracking bracelets worn by Lisa and Nina, who had been released on bail, suddenly went offline. Due to holiday chaos and high activity, it took until the next day to send a squad to their location, but by then, the suspects were nowhere to be found. It soon turned out that they had been meticulously planning their escape for months, and by the time the police went after them, they had already illegally crossed the border into Mexico. From there, they flew to South Korea, and their trail was lost in Cambodia. The FBI was once again involved in the investigation, working with the Cambodian police and immigration services to track down the fugitive suspects. The women came under law enforcement's radar after withdrawing a large sum of money from an ATM. They tried to pay in cash everywhere to avoid revealing their whereabouts. ATM cameras helped identify the fugitives, and another camera on a neighboring building captured the license plate number of the car they arrived in. This information led to the driver, who took the police to the house rented by the extravagant foreigners. The women were rearrested and extradited to the U.S. in February 2022, where justice was to be served. This time, bail was denied, and they were sent directly to jail. Charles's candid confessions. By then, Chuck had fully realized that his lover was not going to save him from prison and was only concerned about herself, leading him to express a desire to cooperate with the investigation and start providing information. His account of the events of that dreadful night horrified many. Beltran confessed that he had been in an intimate relationship with the homeowner, Lisa, and her spouse, Nina. According to him, he engaged in these relationships for money and the opportunity to advance his music career. He harbored no warm feelings towards these women, and often indulged in affairs with young and attractive women, which he never hid. While Nina was indifferent to his actions, Lisa sometimes became wildly jealous. On the fateful night of October 5th, 2020, Chuck met a young student named Maricela at a nightclub. The beautiful, slender girl immediately caught his attention, and it seemed he caught hers as well. After spending several hours drinking cocktails and dancing, he invited her over, and she agreed. When they arrived at his place late at night, Nina and Lisa were already asleep, so Charles easily took the girl to his room. There, the couple engaged in intimate activities and later fell asleep. According to the suspect, in the middle of the night, Lisa entered his room and, seeing the young beauty asleep next to him, flew into a jealous rage. She went to the kitchen to grab a large knife, then returned and leaped onto Maricela, repeatedly striking her. Charles claimed he was awakened by the noise and was disoriented at first, still somewhat intoxicated. When he finally turned on the light, he was confronted with a horrific scene. Maricela's body had slid to the floor next to the bed, where she had bled out. At that moment, Nina entered the room. They just stood there for a few minutes, and nobody attempted to help the victim. When Chuck regained his composure, he realized that the crime might be pinned on him since he had a criminal record, and his influential lovers could escape punishment. That's why, he said, he agreed to help dispose of the body and cover up the crime. Charles stayed with friends for several days, and when he returned to collect his belongings, he noticed that the blood stains on the floor and carpet had nearly disappeared. Lisa told him that she and Nina had taken care of everything and destroyed the evidence of the crime. Nevertheless, all three decided it was best to leave town for a while and watch from afar what would happen next. Lisa Dyke Beltran's version. Lisa's lawyer insisted that his client had no motive to attack the girl and take her life. She claimed that her relationship with Chuck was strictly business, and she viewed his promising music career as a good investment. Who he slept with or flirted with never concerned her. As a key argument, the defender pointed out that Dyke had recently entered into marriage and was happy with Moran. However, no one could explain why, after their wedding, the women suddenly decided to take the surname of the young lodger, who, according to them, meant nothing to them. At the trial, Lisa claimed that Charles was hot-tempered and very cruel, and when drunk, he became a beast, whom she feared. According to her, that night he brought a new girl from the club, but after they became intimate, an argument erupted, and Chuck, in a fit of rage, grabbed a knife. She and Nina ran to the noise and tried to separate the couple, but it was too late. Maricela was dead. They helped dispose of the body and clean up the scene under the threat of becoming his next victims. Witness testimonies. Lisa's friend, who testified in court, claimed that Lisa was literally obsessed with Chuck and had repeatedly confessed to her an uncontrollable desire to eliminate any girl who got close to her young lover. Clearly, she was unable to manage her emotions that night. Additionally, the witness mentioned the odd statue of Santa Muerte at her friend's house. She recalled being surprised by the improvised altar during a visit, but the homeowner jokingly claimed she was into black magic and knew how to cast a spell to ensure a man could only have eyes for her. However, it seems the ritual failed, and the woman resorted to using a knife. Another witness, a real estate agent approached by the women shortly after the incident, testified that they were eager to sell several properties they owned as quickly as possible. They also wanted to put their Dallas home on the market, but since it was the site of the alleged crime, they couldn't while the investigation was ongoing. The situation escalated when the remains of the missing girl were discovered, after which Lisa and Nina were ready to sell the property at half price just to get the money quickly. Trial and sentences. The court took into account Charles's full confession and his cooperation with the investigation. However, the situation for the fugitives worsened after their attempt to flee to another continent. In March 2023, Lisa Dyke Beltran was found guilty of the brutal crime against 23-year-old Maricela, concealing evidence and attempting to flee. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As for Charles Beltran and Nina Morin, they fully admitted their guilt and agreed to cooperate with the investigation. They were only found guilty of concealing evidence. Nina was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but could be released in 3 years due to good behavior. Charles, previously convicted on multiple occasions, was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 8 years. Sometimes exes come back, but the scary thing is not their return, but the fact that they may come back with weapons in their hands. On January 18, 2014, a young couple holding hands walked out of church. It was a bright day they had been looking forward to. The many people attending the service were still inside the church. The man and woman hurried to their parked car to grab boxes of toys and gifts for their young daughter, who was waiting for them at the church. But the subdued January silence was struck by loud pops. One, a second, a third. The young men fell like dolls whose batteries had died. Scarlet pools of blood filled the asphalt around them. A few minutes later, the emergency services received a call that 2 people had been killed in a parking lot near the church. People ran out at the noise. General outrage and shock grew in the roll call of the crowd. A little girl who had not received her presents cried from the panic that gripped her. She, like other parishioners, heard the sounds of gunshots, but did not see the full horror of what had happened. Police arrived at the scene and taped off the area and examined the scene of the attack. When emergency ambulance doctors arrived, they were left with only 2 deaths. The victims were young married couple Nathan and Crystal Maddox. We're going to start at the beginning together. We'll take a look at the lives of our heroes and go into detail about the situation they found themselves in, and also be sure to discuss whether such a tragic end could have been avoided. When lies, betrayal, greed, fear, and darkness become an integral part of someone's mindset, it causes them to commit horrible crimes that no one could ever imagine. In fact, an entire family can be drawn into such crimes, causing many worlds to fall apart. Our story features the brutal double murder of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. So now, if you are interested in learning all the minute details of this case, let's get started. The events of this family send us to Texas, the small town of Combsnale in Tyler County, a town so small that with a population of 563 people, people know each other by sight, and some of them have started families and become relatives. Nathan and Kristen's relationship was very fast-paced. Young people lived on neighboring streets, lived together the first love and the first kiss. The girl's parents did not approve of her choice, and in every possible way prevented their relationship. Kristen could not cross her beloved parents and refused her love. But fate presented a surprise, and Kristen learned that she was expecting a child. Parents had nothing left but to accept the situation and let the lovers get married, because it is unworthy to look in front of people as a single mother. Nathan and Kristen got married in Texas, and soon after the wedding they got a house and had their first child, a daughter, Madison. But family life turned out to be far from the fairy tale story from the movie. Nathan had to work hard to support his family. Having a house and maintaining it doesn't come cheap, so Nathan was forced to take a job away from home. He traveled to Montana. A young husband and father, he tried to visit Kristen and Madison as often as possible. He often sent money home to them, and for the most part, Nathan was pretty sure he had a happy family waiting for him at home. And that seemed to be the case. He loved Kristen, he loved Madison, he thought they had the perfect little family, until one day he came home from Montana. When he walked in the door, he noticed right away that the house was empty. Most of the things inside the house were gone, and there was a note on the kitchen table. In just a few lines, Kristen cruelly informed him that she was leaving Nathan. The reason seemed strange. The woman wrote that she didn't know where her husband was missing, who he was with, or when he would return. She wrote that she was unhappy, but that was a lie, because Kristen knew perfectly well that Nathan was in Montana for work. He called all the time, asking how she and her daughter were doing, what they were doing. He sent them money on a regular basis. The worst part of this episode was that she took Madison with her, and Nathan is now banned from seeing his daughter. Kristen did a very mean thing. She went to the police station and used false information to gain full custody of her daughter, indicating that her father was not providing for or interested in the child. Nathan knew that the ex-wife and daughter had returned to his parents' home. He repeatedly tried to see little Madison, but the Westfall family was adamant. They were jubilant that they had managed to get rid of an unloved son-in-law. Time passed. Nathan returned to his hometown to be closer to his daughter. He did not give up trying to see her, but he knew that it was necessary, with the help of a lawyer, to obtain official custody of his daughter and to achieve legal meetings. During this difficult period, he meets Crystal. They'd known each other since childhood. They went to school together. When they were teenagers, their paths diverged. Crystal went to the big city. She dreamed of graduating from university, but in her last year she got married, and instead of a successful career, she got a happy family life, in which 4 children were born. But unfortunately, after a while, the relationship between the spouses went downhill, and they decided to divorce. In 2011, Crystal and her children returned to her hometown. 2 longtime friends met each other at the most necessary moment for each of them. Nathan was enamored with Crystal's children. From the way their mother interacted with the children, from Crystal's inexhaustible energy that lit up everything around her, like a fairy with her optimism. In 2013, Nathan and Crystal were married. Nathan worked at the Lakin Industries warehouse, while Crystal started a small clothing business, opened a children's clothing boutique under her own name, and handmade jewelry. The family's business was doing very well, and it became feasible for them to hire a good lawyer to get a chance to see Nathan's daughter from her first marriage and try to get custody. Madison was thrilled with her daddy's new wife and the siblings she had. The girl was completely happy in her father's home. This made Lida and Paula Westfall, Kristen's parents, completely resentful. They were very afraid of losing their only granddaughter. Back in 2012, Kristen Westfall, with the support of her parents, applied to the court for full custody of her daughter. The custody battle dragged on for a long 2 years. The Westfall family had hoped to get full custody very quickly, but Crystal's arrival in Nathan's life changed the whole picture of his existence. A full family, a home, and a good job made a strong case in court, and Nathan was granted visitation rights with his daughter. He was very happy and prepared to take his daughter away for the day. In October 2013, the judge allowed Nathan and Crystal to have supervised visits with Madison. On January 18, 2014, Nathan and Crystal arrived at Mount Carmel Church for Sunday service, after which they wanted to go for a walk with 6-year-old Madi. They left the church a little earlier than the rest of the congregation to retrieve pre-prepared gifts for Madison from their car. Just a few steps later, 3 loud pops were heard. Nathan and Crystal were killed by fatal gunshot wounds to the head. The small town was shocked by the gratuitous execution of a young married couple. But as it later turned out, there was a reason after all. But why take 2 people's lives, so brazenly and so brutally? The police arrived on the scene and meticulously investigated the scene. Nathan and Crystal had been shot in the head with a .30 caliber rifle, which was found at the scene along with .30 caliber shell casings. An autopsy later revealed that Nathan had also been shot in the thigh with a 20-gauge shotgun, leading investigators to assume that there were 2 shooters, as it is obvious that one person cannot shoot and reload at the same time. Investigators conducted a series of interviews with witnesses to gather information about the Maddox family and build their picture of what happened. They interviewed parishioners, acquaintances, and relatives of the slain family. But what surprised them most was the reaction of Nathan's ex-wife's family. Kristen and her parents were called to testify at the police station, as were the other witnesses. The further behavior of this family caused great surprise to the investigators. The Westfalls played up the tragedy too much, trying to hide their joy at the deaths that had occurred. Paul Westfall was so shocked that he went into a seizure, so much so that he couldn't believe the news of Nathan's death that he had to call emergency services. A grown man who had spent years trying to rid himself of Nathan's presence in his daughter's life was so upset that he had a seizure. Kristen was the first person interviewed, and her interview was a little creepy. She was the only one of the family to maintain a very calm and natural demeanor, despite the fact that she and Nathan had been together for a long time and had a child together. Kristen continued to give some really weird details about him, trying to bring out only the negative aspects of her ex-husband. She reported that she knew who killed him. In Montana, Nathan was listed in dangerous motorcycle gangs. One day, one of the gang members showed up at Nathan's mother's house and threatened to kill him. This story checked out, but it remained an empty threat because of an accidentally broken motorcycle, and the gang itself turned out to be a common exaggeration to confuse the investigation. Also, as an alibi, Kristen said that on the day of the crime, she was at the grocery store with her father Paul, a couple miles from the church, after which they both went home. Surveillance footage at 10:57 a.m. confirmed their presence at the grocery store. Paul Westfall told the exact same story, but Paul was a hunter and had a firearm in his arsenal, so his hands were tested for traces of gunpowder, but the result was negative. But until now, his reaction to the death of Nathan, whom he sincerely hated and never hid it, seemed to the investigators very strange and played. It left a sliver of doubt in his sincerity. Interviews with loved ones, over a short period of time, helped investigators discover that Nathan Maddox was involved in a custody battle over his daughter with his ex-wife, Kristen Westfall, and her family. After a long and bitter dispute in court, he was close to retaining custody, something that none of the Westfall family members strongly wanted. Such a desperate battle between the parties may well have been cause for reprisal. But the police had no concrete evidence to arrest any member of the Westfall family. The family consisted of 4 people, and 2 people were the shooters. Investigators had yet to be convinced of their story and figure out which family member pulled the trigger, taking the lives of 2 people, or whether a hired killer did it. The investigators took a different path and decided to act through the main protagonist of the controversy, little Madison Maddox. After all, her safety was at stake. She continued to be with a family that could pose a threat to her. Police officers, along with Child Protective Services, CPS, came to remove the girl from the home, but faced a wave of protest and rage. The behavior of the older Westfall family entailed a search of the home. What the police later found in the house shocked them. A gun was stored on a shelf in an easily accessible place in the room. The culmination of the search was the illegal drugs scattered around the house. It turns out that in 2013, Kristen Westfall was charged and arrested for possession of a controlled substance. The arrests were repeated, which clearly indicated that Kristen couldn't be a good mother to Madison. When Kristen went to jail in early 2013, her parents were granted temporary custody of their daughter and would not allow Nathan to see her while their granddaughter was in their custody. However, despite Child Protective Services prohibitions, Kristen continued to live in the house with her young daughter in the same room and slept in the same bed with her. Even in 2014, with the injunctions in place, Kristen continued to live with the rest of her family and had daily access to her daughter, despite being ordered by the court to move. After a search of the Westfalls' home, where a used syringe with residue of illegal substances was found on a dresser and a gun on the nightstand next to Kristen's bed, little Madison was taken into temporary custody, and additional evidence found led to the Westfalls' arrest. State authorities wanted the girl placed in foster care and said they found supplies for illegal drugs in the Westfalls' home, as well as a gun on a nightstand within easy reach of the girl. Child Protective Services was involved in the Madison Maddox custody case. In March 2014, less than 2 months after the tragic murder outside the church, authorities made 4 arrests. Kristen Westfall, 29, her younger brother Cameron, and her parents Paul and Lita Westfall were arrested. There was no direct evidence of their guilt in the Maddox murder. Cross-examinations didn't produce the desired result either. So the police had to go for a little trickery to put the squeeze on the most vulnerable member of the Westfall family. That was 18-year-old Cameron. He was told that if proven guilty, all members of his family would face life imprisonment, and the direct killers would face the death penalty. Cameron was young and kind-hearted. He was very scared and quickly agreed to cooperate with the investigation, revealing all the details of what happened. The crime against the young couple, Maddox, turned out to be carefully pre-planned by the family gang in order to permanently exclude Nathan from the role of father. Shortly after the shooting episode, it was revealed that Nathan and his ex-wife Kristen, with the help of her family, had been secured a nasty custody disagreement over their 5-year-old daughter Madison. The long and costly legal battle was to end well for Nathan. The Westfalls were concerned and carefully plotted a scheme to remove him from Madison's life. Nathan wanted to take care of his daughter alone, but the Westfalls were not interested in letting her go even to see her father, let alone give him the girl permanently. The Westfalls were very hurt by the fact that the former son-in-law had settled down in life and was living a good life. Thus, when the judge allowed him multiple visitations, it became obvious that he could win the trial, which led to Kristen coming up with an original idea to get rid of him once and for all. At first, Kristen tried to find someone to kill her ex-husband. When that failed, she and her father decided to do it themselves. On Sunday afternoon, the family often attended church, and the day of January 18th was no exception. Lita Westfall and little Madison drove to the appointed time for the service. Afterward, she had to hand the girl over to her father. In the meantime, Kristen and Paul went to a distant store and posed as customers to get on CCTV cameras to create a solid alibi. But they miscalculated the timing. Each family member had their own responsible role to play. For the entire interval, they communicated by text message, updating each other on the Maddox's movements. Letha, who had attended the service, informed Paul as Nathan and Crystal prepared to leave the church. She also called 911 immediately after the murder. Cameron took an active role in concealing the evidence. He discarded the gun used after his sister and father shot the newlyweds in the head near a remote church. He drove to a lake where he discarded the bag of weapons. Cameron soon agreed to cooperate with authorities and revealed that Kristen originally came up with the idea and the family went along. He also pointed out to investigators the location where he had discarded the murder weapons. Divers later retrieved said items, which confirmed Cameron's words. The police detained 29-year-old Kristen, her brother Cameron and her parents, Paul and Letha Westfall, and charged them with organized crime. Thus, Kristen and Paul pulled the trigger, with Cameron and Lita acting as willing accomplices. Given that Lita was at the church at the time of the incident, it was obvious that she was not responsible for the shots that killed Nathan and Crystal Maddox. However, phone records showed that she was responsible for informing her daughter and spouse of the couple's whereabouts, and that she informed them as they left the church. While Kristen and Paul were the ones who fired the bullets, Lita and her son Cameron participated in the crime intentionally. The trial was very loud and lengthy. Each member of the Westfall family was tried separately. Paul Westfall continued to act out his seizures, so he was found mentally unfit and remained in a state psychiatric hospital for a while for evaluation. In May 2014, a judge found Paul incompetent, but that verdict was overturned 4 months later. With Paul and Letha facing the death penalty for the murders of Nathan and Crystal Maddox, they had little choice but to agree to a mutually beneficial plea bargain with the DA's office. To avoid the death penalty, Paul was forced to take a plea bargain with the prosecution. He pleaded guilty to the charges and thus was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Lita also took a plea bargain with the investigation. Instead of going to trial, she pleaded guilty to participating in organized criminal activity. Lita will not be eligible for parole until 2046. She is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, but will be eligible for parole in 2044. At the time of sentencing, Lita Westfall was 54 years old, so she will likely die in prison. Kristen is the third member of the Westfall family to stand trial in this case. Throughout the entire court hearing, Kristen pleaded not guilty. To all the accusations against her, she replied that her whole family was crazy. She was the only one who was sincere about it. When her entire family, Letha, Paul, and Cameron, came to the trial and testified against her, she couldn't say anything to their faces. In August 2016, the final trial and sentencing for Kristen Westfall began. The motive for killing Nathan and Crystal Maddox was custody of Madison Maddox. Kristen adamantly did not want Nathan to see Maddie whenever he wanted. She did not want to give him the privilege because she could not see him happy. She wanted to control her daughter and father's communication herself, and through the child, she wanted to control everything he did and everything he felt. The trial took over a week. In the end, with overwhelming evidence against her, it took the jury 8 hours to find her guilty of capital murder. In a Brazos County courtroom, attorneys and the judge considered final motions for the woman. Kristen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole nearly 9 months before her father pleaded guilty and received an identical sentence in May 2017. Kristen Westphal is currently incarcerated at the William Hobby Women's Prison in Falls County, Texas. While Paul, Lita, and Kristen Westphal were ultimately charged with 2 counts of murder, officials only charged the youngest member of the family, Cameron, with 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. Cameron Westphal pleaded guilty to 2 counts of third-degree tampering with evidence. The judge deferred sentencing contingent upon Cameron Westphal testifying against his family. He faced up to 10 years in prison on each charge. It was reported that he had nothing to do with the actual shooting, and that his mother was also not involved because she was at the church when the crime occurred. However, phone records show that she texted her husband and daughter as the Maddoxes were preparing to go home. Currently, Cameron is incarcerated at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Huntsville, Texas, where he is expected to remain until his expected release date in 2025. Cameron was very indifferent to the crime, and he really had nothing to do with the crime, as he claims Paul allegedly just happened to come home, handed Cameron 2 guns and told him to throw them away. But the investigation didn't rule out that Cameron knew a little more than he was saying. After all, Cameron lived in the house with his family, and he simply couldn't have not heard about Kristen and Paul's plans to kill the Maddox family. And if he was an unspoken witness to the plot, after all, why didn't he go to the police or even try to stop his family? So ended the story of a double murder at the House of Dodd in a close-knit community that shook the entire state of Texas to its core. Recall that on January 18, 2014, Nathan and Crystal Maddox were shot and killed right outside the gates of Mount Carmel Baptist Church near Colmsney, after waiting for a legal and supervised visitation with his 5-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. It soon became clear that the girl's biological mother, Kristen Westphal, and her entire family, brother Cameron and parents Lloyd Paul and Lita Westphal, were behind the crime. This case was complicated. The community demanded justice. Lloyd Paul, Lita, and Cameron Westphal made a deal with the investigation. After agreeing to testify against his sister, Cameron took a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. In 2016, a judge sentenced Cameron to 10 years in prison, and his mother received a life sentence. The following year, a judge sentenced Lloyd Paul to life in prison. He avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to first-degree murder. Under the plea agreement, he would not be able to appeal the sentence. The crime family's protagonist, Kristen Westphal, received a life sentence without parole. In a fateful decision by her mother, Madison Maddox lost her father and will likely never see the grandparents who cared for her and perhaps even loved her. Time after the Westphal family was sentenced, the legal battle for custody of Madison Maddox continues. Nathan Maddox's father, Jim, has since filed a petition to become the primary guardian of his granddaughter. A huge number of people die in custody battles every year. Most importantly, the children are not made happier, but orphans with psychological problems. All the people in the town were devout, went to church, and they're also easily killed people. Covering themselves with concern for the girl, the older generation of Westphal fulfilled the wish of their daughter and helped to commit this terrible crime. What were they hoping for? Based on the story, Nathan was not a bad or mean person. He loved his own daughter and strove to be a good father to her. Obviously, in addition to the custody battle, the hatred associated with the fact that the girl's father had created a new family, was able to pick up his mind, and started a new life without crime comes first. and was perfectly happy with the new woman, having something he didn't have in his past relationship with Kristen. That's what was causing all the negativity from the ex-wife, and she was able to turn her entire family against him. If it was just about custody, they wouldn't have killed Nathan's new woman, and that's probably true. After all, the Madison custody dispute started before Nathan and Crystal's relationship. There is certainly only one loser in the history of the Westfall versus Maddox fight. Of course, it's Madison. I'd like to believe that when she grows up, she won't remember the wild selfishness with which adults tried to take advantage of her by saying words about love. After all, if the family had loved the child, they would have tried to build a normal relationship for her sake. But they were only acting to please their own egos.